Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, welcome to the Wisdom of Kim McDonnell. As I say in all of these episodes, we live in an increasingly complex world, but an increasingly superficial, impatient world. And socially, politically, economically, there's a lot going on. And, we're in an era where there needs to be a deeper level of wisdom applied to some of the big problems that we're tackling. More pause, more time for thinking, and a greater sense of stewardship, this idea of take what you've been given or given responsibility for and return it with increase beyond just what your normal contribution might have been. And my guest today, Kim McDonnell, is the CEO of Thankful, and it's a fascinating blend of philanthropy and business, and being able to make the challenge that a lot of people have. How do you make business and philanthropy? How do you the real business for good kind of thinking? And so Kim's operated at United Nations level. Kim, there's a bunch of things that you've been involved in, sat on panels and boards and things like that. But I'd love you to just briefly outline for people Thankful, and also this idea of future-proofing food systems and this mission that you're on.
Thank you, Simon. So we started Thankful in 2013, and where it really came from, spending most of my career in advertising and marketing, wanting to use those skills. Instead of convincing people to buy more stuff they didn't really need with credit cards they didn't really want, how could I use those skills to try and make the world a little bit better? So the idea of Thankful was created, and we spent a lot of time really understanding new business models and social enterprise, which was relatively in its infancy in sort of 2010, 2012, and understanding consumer behavior or human behavior to really understand what was going to be a powerful motivator to get people to take action and to do things differently and to step up to the plate and address some of the big challenges that the world is facing. So the idea of Thankful was born after spending lots of different conversations, and where it has come from and the science that sits behind it is we know that being thankful is the single most powerful thing we can do on a daily basis to improve our mental health and well-being. That's been proven through science and research. We also know through science and research that when we do express gratitude or when we are thankful, it actually improves our physical health as well. So it improves our cardiovascular systems, our immune systems, our ability to cope with chronic pain. But what we were super excited about was that being thankful is more than just a feeling. It's actually a powerful motivator to get people to take action. So as an example, when we are thankful for women and girls, we will never have to have a conversation about gender equality or eliminating violence against women and girls, because every woman will be respected and valued for their contribution to the world. We know the power of environmental gratitude as well. And again, climate change is such a big global challenge, if not the biggest global challenge we are all facing. And there's a lot of climate change fatigue. But when we talk about environmental gratitude and remind people all of the reasons and all of the wonderful things that we've got to be thankful for when it comes to the planet, we're more likely to take action to restore it and regenerate it. So Thankful was created back in 2013. We have been on a mission all over the world with Thankful in a variety of different activities. And then in 2019, we launched Thankful for Farmers here in Australia to change the narrative around farming and agriculture, and to recognise that farmers wear two incredibly important roles. They are frontline of food supply chains, so responsible for our future food security, but they are also frontline environmentalists as custodians of the land, and through their farming practices can actually reverse the impact of climate change. So through that work from paddock all the way through to plate, one of the things that we recognised was the huge amount of food waste that occurs throughout the supply chain. Give you some context, Simon, if we saved a quarter of all the food in the world that currently gets wasted, there would not be a hungry person on this planet, and we would fight hunger. Food waste contributes 9 times more greenhouse gas emissions than the entire global aviation industry. And if it were a country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, behind China and the US. And of those 800 plus million people who are currently facing hunger crisis, 60% of them are women and girls. So it goes a long way in addressing gender equality and so many other big issues that the world is facing. So for several years now, future-proofing food systems has been a big focus on what we've been doing across the entire supply chain, and have some really exciting initiatives out there that are doing just that.
Oh, coming from large West Australian farming family stock, the idea of farmers as custodians of the land, and understanding the nature of that and food production, there's often these things underneath concepts and ideas that there's so many directions I could go in just out of your introduction, but there's often so many deeper concepts and ideas behind something that people think might be quite simple, like food security or family violence, and there's always something else underneath it that needs to be dug down. And I think that's one of the concerns actually that I have in an impatient and an immediate world, of people taking the time to really figure out all these other things. Like, if we could secure food systems, there's so many things we could fix, right? And across a broad range, right? Environment, violence against, women and girls, poverty, or people, going hungry. And I just have this concern actually that we don't do that depth of thinking, and we jump to an opinion rather than really what's going on. It's interesting with Thankful, it's almost like you've found a vehicle or a mechanism that you could point at almost anything and really start to work towards solving a significant and major problem because of this vehicle that you've found. So I'm pretty fascinated with some of that science behind finding that being thankful is so much more powerful than just have some gratitude. Are you able to lean in on that just for a few minutes?
Absolutely, and you're right. And that's exactly what we have created with Thankful. We wanted it to be that platform or that vehicle to create systemic change across all of the challenges that the world is facing. And whether it is being thankful for women or girls, or thankful for love, working with LGBTQIA plus communities and around inclusivity, whether it's thankful for a place to call home, tackling the global refugee crisis, or thankful for food, or thankful for the planet. It's limitless. And we know that gratitude is such a powerful motivator to get people to take action, because when we value something, when we appreciate something, when we recognize its significance and its contribution, we are so much more likely to want to take action and do something about it. So, and it's good for our mental health, and it's good for our physical health when we remember to be thankful for the things we have in our lives.
So it actually serves everybody, right?
Absolutely, it does. Yeah.
And it's a very important thing for people to, think about, people who are stepping into leadership in any kind of theater, military, commercial, politics, or whatever. It's not one of the automatic things that we teach or ask people in significant leadership roles to bring to the table. This kind of thankful approach, like really, basing it on valuing the thing that you do. In fact, we've almost had a portable view on leadership that you could lead anything as long as you have certain management skills, as opposed to, are you really connected to this thing? Do you really appreciate it and have gratitude for it?
And it's really interesting. So research has shown that when we introduce this concept of thankfulness and to kids in schools, and we remind them to, celebrate the small milestones, and we know that the pro-social benefits of being thankful are greater compassion, greater kindness, and greater empathy. And they're all the things that we desperately need in leaders across the globe right now. It's those soft skills that we can't assume our kids are learning. We have to teach them that. And being thankful is an amazing vehicle to do just that as well.
I have mixed feelings about social media, but so much of the media children consume today might be teaching exactly the opposite of some of those things. Interestingly, one of your key messages is purpose, and purpose and doing good is good for business.
Yep.
I'd love you to just unpack that a little bit. And then I've got so many other things I want to talk about with you.
Gosh, I could talk about purpose all day. And going back to a comment that you made earlier, I think one thing that I really want to clarify as well, that purpose needs to be at the heart and the core of the organization. This is not something that can be driven from a marketing team or a corporate social responsibility team or a HR team. It needs to be embedded across the whole organization for it to be meaningful and for it to be authentic and for it to be impactful. So absolutely doing good is good for business. And I, again, can quote you stats all day, but we know, particularly with the Gen Z and millennials who are going to make up 75% of the workforce by 2025, that they are looking to work for organizations that have clearly standing up and addressing some of the big and playing a part in trying to solve some of the big challenges that the world is facing. So from a talent acquisition perspective and even a staff retention perspective, organizations need to have a clear position on what their role is in addressing some of these big challenges. But we also know that 67% of consumers globally want to engage with organizations that, again, are not just talking about what they're doing and the good that they're doing. They want a clear demonstration of the good that they're doing. So it's incredibly important that organizations aren't, doing the woke washing or the greenwashing, and they're actually putting their money or their actions where their mouth is to demonstrate that. And there's a lot of performative sort of allyship happening, which is what's leading to that woke washing and that greenwashing. And we're seeing that can have a detrimental effect on the brand or the integrity of your brand and your organization as well. So it is really important that your actions speak louder than your words necessarily.
Yeah, it's, I've been, in the world of business for a long time now, and we've gone through those cycles of management by objectives, and then find the vision and mission, and yet you meet with the executive team and no one can actually remember what the vision and mission is, and and then what are the corporate values, and then find the organizational purpose, and let's use that in our marketing. And there was a quantity of that which was, well, we have to have one of these, as opposed to who are we really and what do we actually really stand for. And I agree with you. I mean, the world has absolutely moved towards people actually care. I mean, I look at what a 22-year-old thinks about today compared to when I was 22. And, I cared about sport and, being with my friends, but they do think deeply about a lot of things. And, people care about things today, and they want companies that care about things, it's kind of that simple. And maybe that's always been humans,
The next generations coming up, I think they are underestimated often and not given enough credit often. And, they are research tells us these are the generations who believe they can make a difference and expect to make a difference as well, and we need to be empowering them and enabling them to be able to take action and to make a difference and celebrating that success, I think, as well.
So it moves us into the conversation, which is another, something else that you keep talking about, which is this power of collective action, and how that can have such a big impact. What is your definition of collective action, and what does that mean in some simple terms for people?
I think, there's so many different organizations, there's so many different commitments to wanting to do good, but none of us is going to be able to solve this and solve the big challenges that the world is facing on our own. And it is only going to be through collaboration and through that network, and creating that network where there are clear value exchanges as well, because I appreciate there needs to be value exchange to create collaborative networks. But it's through collaboration that we're going to genuinely get collective action that is going to be big enough and impactful enough to drive the change to address some of the systemic challenges that the world is facing. I think a lot of organizations with very good intentions are creating band-aid solutions to problems. And again, that goes down to, in my thinking, to just performative solution as well. It's not solving the problem. It makes us feel good when we can say as an organization, we've given $10 million to aid, but what's the impact of that? We never, very rarely see the impact of that or have the reporting. So it's not addressing the problem. It's just simply putting a Band-Aid on it to make ourselves feel good. And it's a short-term solution. We need to be thinking long-term, and we need to be thinking of what the systemic problem is and how can we fix it at its core rather than just another Band-Aid to make ourselves feel good.
So, the world that you've put yourself in, really, and we notice this with people that do become stewards of something. It's I've had this conversation with many people. One of the ways I kind of define a steward, leaders will see something and then go towards it and take on the role. Stewards almost have it come at them and they can't ignore it. And they might actually push it away for a little while because, I've got this other stuff going on, but it just keeps coming at them. And eventually they go, I have to do something about that. Food security, for example. And, it's interesting. It's these people that step into this stewardship role also recognize they're going to have to be a bit provocative. They're going to have to push some buttons. You have to rattle cages. When you talk about it's a bit of a performative solution, that would trigger some people who are doing that. Yet you have to form these alliances and collective action with people who influence, leaders, politicians, and so on, industries and brands. And I'm just wondering, what are some of but that ability to form alliances would be helpful for everybody. So what are some of your go-to methods of really forming those alliances, but not losing the need for you to be able to be provocative with some of these people?
Yeah, and it really goes back to that value exchange, why, and understanding and listening. Why do they want to be part of this? Why do they want to be part of the work that we are doing? And, is it so that they can engage? Is it more potential consumers or people? Is it so they can build their social equity and their licensing? Or is it because they have it, it's deep and it's integral to what their service or their positioning is? So really understanding what they want from the relationship with us and the collaboration, and making sure that they are coming to the collaboration with good intent.
Yeah.
None of us are perfect, but if an organization comes to us to say, we want to be part of this because we've got good intention and we want to try and address it and do something about it, then we'll work with them to really understand how they can do that, both internally as well as externally, with their messaging. And we are working across, from federal all the way down to state governments, multiple state governments and LGAs, all the way down to that level to see how we can reduce food waste. But we're also working with industry associations as well. And then we're working with corporate partners and some really incredible corporate partners, and making sure that we're delivering value to them and they're delivering value back to us in terms of helping to amplify, and a lot of conversation and a lot of honesty and transparency as well.
Yeah. I've asked that question of different people in different ways. How do you form the relationships, build the alliances, connect, et cetera, et cetera. And there's some commonality of response, and it kind of begs the question, could it be as simple as listening to people and having a conversation? Sometimes we're looking for a much more strategic answer or a complex answer, but like, what is going to be valuable to you, and what are you really after? And let's actually talk that through. I'd love to dip into the food security and the security of food systems and farmers. I'd love to talk about how you see the future of food security, but if you're having, as you said, you're already having conversations at multiple levels, almost global or local, in terms of the role that farmers play feeding the world. I mean, it's such an important industry that is often overlooked because it's out there in the country and no one sees them. They're beavering away from sunrise to sunset, and somehow the food ends up on the table. And so you've mentioned it has an impact on climate change, and so what is that work really? Is it about smarter farming practices? And then let's talk about the future of food security as you see it unpacking.
Yeah, so certainly with our work with Thankful for Farmers, we focus on three key areas. One is how can we help the farm practice more climate smart agricultural practices?
Right.
So, and whether that is regeneration of the land or carbon neutral farming or a reduction of waste on farm, both organic as well as inorganic waste. It's really working to understand what are some of the things that we can do to help producers to tackle some of their challenges and to be more climate smart. The other area that we focused on, which is incredibly important, is the health and well-being of our farmers. You know, they're an aging demographic, and it's really struggling to get younger people involved in the agricultural sector because there's so many stereotypes about what a traditional farmer looks like. And, you know, these days, farmers are producers of food, but they're also innovators, they're scientists, they're entrepreneurs, all sorts of, they wear so many different hats in any given day. And the technology that they're using these days on farm is also incredibly important, but they suffer disproportionately high rates of mental health and well-being challenges, which we know in suicide, but also disease states like cardiovascular disease, etc. So how can we future-proof the health and well-being of our farmers to ensure we have generations of farmers to come? And then the third area that we focus on is regional and rural communities, because we know if those communities aren't thriving, it's going to be very difficult for our agricultural sector to survive as well. So looking at infrastructure within those communities, or what else do they need? And, you know, across the work that we've done, we've looked at everything from drought resilience programs to funding the Queensland Rural Flying Doctor Service to create a book, Mental Health and Wellbeing on the Land, specifically for men and women on the land, to working with Deakin University to understand the correlation between a farmer's mental health and well-being and their propensity to practice climate smart agriculture. So if they look after themselves, they're more likely to look after the land, because that can completely change the way we address both climate smart agriculture as well as health and well-being if there's a correlation between the two. And we've created a documentary called Thankful for Soil, which is talking about why soil is so important. You know, if we don't have healthy soil, we don't have healthy food. If we don't have healthy food, we don't have healthy human beings. So, and there's incredible work being done by farmers across the country and across the globe to really protect and regenerate those soils as well. So future-proofing food systems entails all of that, but then you also put food waste into that. We know 30% of food never leaves the farm, and it's a lot of that is nutritionally still incredibly sound. There's nothing wrong with it from a nutritional perspective, and that's going to landfill. Plastic waste on farm is another huge issue as well. How can we divert that or repurpose or recycle it to create a circular economy solution? So we're working on all of those solutions through the work that we do. And then we're also looking at household food waste, because we know globally 61% of all food waste actually happens in our homes. Most of us don't think we waste very much food, but it costs the average Australian family about $3,000 a year of food that we buy and end up in the rubbish bin. So how can we address that from a mindset? So again, you know, these are big problems, and we're not going to solve this problem overnight. And it is going to take that collaborative and collective action across the entire industry to address it and to try and find solutions to it. And in my lifetime, I probably won't see the solution to it, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't start working on it.
And I love the headline opportunity of, you know, thankful for soil, thankful for ... I mean, the more you talk through it, the more it leads, you know, as the mechanism to make it all happen. And, you know, we have the same kind of waste occurring in non-food product, you know, the amount of, you know, white goods and homewares and clothing and everything else. And that is all going to landfill. And yet there are people who are sleeping on the floor or, you know, don't have warm clothes. And how do we divert that and affect all of that? And so, you know, there's just listening to you talk about food security, farming, the implications that, you know, it's one idea that just keeps expanding and thinking. And I think there's a particular application in this as well for business in general. You know, you clearly have this deep, deep, profound wisdom around this now that has built over time. And I suspect it wasn't that anywhere near as complete picture when you first lent in on, let's look at food security. You probably had a hint of some stuff. And so, you know, let's put our marketing hat and business hat back on. You know, we don't have to have the whole answer for something to take it to the market and try and do something with it. You know, what might lessons be for entrepreneurs specifically in terms of what you've learned from your journey and unpacking, because that's a big value story. I listen to you talk about that and instantly I go, that makes sense. we should do something about that. I'm buying that story, right? But it's the depth of wisdom you have underneath it that you can just bring to the table. So what are some of the business lessons? You're a marketing person, you have that experience as well, that entrepreneurs might learn from this? I mean, they're all hunting for the USP, right? The story, the brand story, but actually just listening to you talk is the story. Any lessons for the budding entrepreneur?
Definitely. I think, so often we do all of this research and we just don't start because we want it to be perfect when we start. And, as any entrepreneur will tell you, there's always a lot of people who will tell you it's not possible or you've got more chance of boiling the ocean. And I think, just get started. You're never going to get it right. And you might launch being, 50% right or 60% right and a whole lot of assumptions, but use that, evolve on it, and keep building that depth of knowledge and that depth of experience, and being open and flexible to, shift course if as you go and through your journey, you find that this is where your effort should be focused, or this is how you should evolve your product or your business. Be prepared to shift, and depending upon what you're learning and what people are telling you throughout that process as well. So being agile, just get started. Don't worry about starting with the perfect product, because it's never going to be perfect. It's always going to evolve anyway. And continue to learn and to understand the data that sits behind it, or understand the feedback that you're getting as well.
Yeah. The market often tells you, but you've got to
Yep.
be in the market. What are some of the emerging technologies that you see potentially playing out in the future of sustainable agriculture? And some of those technologies, or the direction of some of those technologies, may play out in a bunch of other areas that, Thankful either points to or could start to point to. But, the world's losing its mind over AI. And, we're turning to technology to solve so many things. I'm interested in where you see some of the technology going in farming, and then, beyond that, perhaps.
Yeah, I think certainly the technology that's being used by farmers these days to really understand soil, and how can they protect and regenerate that soil, understand its composition, is incredible, and the data that they're constantly collecting as well. So being able to overlay that with prediction of weather, how they can make sure the soil has the most amount of nutrients, but also can retain water, so that they're getting the best possible yields as well. And just being smarter, producing more with less, but making sure the nutritional output of the food is still what we all need. So seeing some of that technology is incredible. Labor is a big issue with farming. Yeah. And we saw that in COVID. So we heard so many devastating stories that farmers were plowing produce back into the ground because they simply could not get the labor force out into on farm to be able to pick and pack the produce. So we're seeing lots of advances with that process. How can we reduce the dependency upon labor? And we also know it's a huge cost as well. It adds to the cost enormously. So there's a lot of technology happening there as well. So there's so many wonderful things that we are seeing. And then we're seeing the rise of the circular economy. So, delivering what that 30% of produce that would normally being plowed back into ground or being buried on farm that doesn't leave the farm. People are being really innovative on what they can do to recover value from that. And using food technology. So there's an incredible farmer in Queensland who, surplus of bananas, they're making banana flour. Berries, we know that if it's a wet day, then you're going to lose 50% of your crop on that day that you pick, just because of the weather conditions that you can't control. But what else can you do with that product? So there's lots of new technology, from freeze drying it to create powder that can then be on-sold. So it's really exciting to see some of the innovations in that respect as well. And then, of course, with the work that we're doing across a household, we're using technology to help people to use more of what they have in their fridge, freezer, and pantry, so they're not wasting it and they're able to use it, so they can save time and they can save money and they can save food. And we spent 3 years building that piece of technology and working with a whole bunch of very clever people to make sure that you can totally personalize the entire experience.
Listening to you talk through the future of technology, it really, innovation is table stakes these days. for the longest time, companies focused on how can we be an innovation-led company, and how can we have more innovation. But in the world that we live in and the pace at which it changes, innovation is table stakes. If you're not looking into technology and what you can do to be more efficient, more effective, have greater impact with the fewer resources, you will be left behind in a pure commercial sense, but also in a business for good sense. Waste. Humans are consumers, unless we actually change some things, and waste is kind of the worst form of consumption there actually is. You would be in, and you have operated in some pretty high level conversations around the world, and so we kind of arrive at a conversation about the ethical dilemmas. When you're talking about food waste, security of food, farming, any number of other things that you point thankful towards, even the notion of business for good. Well, hang on, that's okay as long as you're making a profit. Profit first, and then they're not always ethical dilemmas in terms of malicious ethical dilemmas, but you would have been in some conversations that were stretching and challenging, ethical or moral or just boundaries around conversations for good. And what are some of the more challenging dilemmas that you've had to work through with people and partners in the nature of what you're doing? And then I'd love to unpack how you tackle some of those things.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And we have certainly sat in some meetings where, that corporate or that brand would say to us, well, actually, why do we want to do that? Because it might cost us some money. Point, but it's the right thing to do. And I think going back to that listening and that value exchange, it's okay, it might cost you in the short term, but let's not think about next week or even next year. Let's think about the big picture here and think long term. What's it going to do? It's actually going to deliver you greater loyalty from the people who may engage with you and your brand, and therefore your lifetime value. You might get a greater share of heart as well as wallet from your existing customers. So, short term, yes, it may cost you, but long term, it's going to be a win-win, and it's going to be a win for you as an organization. It's going to be a win for people, and more importantly, it's going to be a win for the planet as well. So really trying to shift some of their thinking from that very short-term focus, which I think, and we see this in politics. The political term is 4 years. So it's often no one wants to make the tough decision that's going to be a 10-year or a 12-year before they see the benefit or the return on the investment or the return on the impact of that particular decision. And it's the same in the business world. Everyone wants to see, to your point earlier, the short, quick wins, but we need to start thinking long-term. We need to think about what's the big impact we can have and how that is going to long-term impact my business or my organization.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting answer. Oftentimes when I raise this question about the ethical dilemmas and how do you handle them, it's about, having kind of a clear sense of values and those sorts of things. But raising this issue of short-term versus long-term focus, for a long time I've been, making the argument that time is the great equalizer. And time compounds everything. So things that are not being done well get worse over time. Things that are being done really well get better over time. And, business leaders could do well to really, really understand time. Time always wins. Ultimately, we can't stop it from being a year down the track, it's going to be. And you've just sparked this thought in my mind that in the short term, most decisions you make are almost ethically justifiable. You could find a way of finding an angle that rationalizes it for you. Yep. But in the long term, generally speaking, it's probably only going to be the greater good that makes sense. And so, if we could click our fingers and have leadership worldwide always think long-term first, like how will we be judged for this 10 years down the track? We might see a whole lot of different decisions being made, which is pretty interesting. So as we start to round this out, we could talk about these kinds of issues all day. I mean, I could talk all day just about food security because it's obviously it's close to my heart, but also it should be close to everybody's heart. It's such a big impact worldwide that I don't think I'd certainly hadn't realized half the things you've been speaking about. But as we start to bring this to a close, I'd like people to know a bit more about Kim McDonnell. And you come from Mount Isa, so that that's I suspect when you were growing up in Mount Isa, you probably never saw this as the future. But we're all shaped often by a small number of people over the course of a lifetime and some experiences, and it's always interesting finding what were the key kind of gateways or people you met that landed you at this place where you care so much about these things. You had the skill and the willingness to actually do it. For those people internationally who aren't aware of what Mount Isa is, it's a mining town. It's it's not near a city. It's very country. The journey is interesting. The people and the experiences that you think are probably the biggest milestones that put you here.
Growing up in Mount Isa, and I knew no different as a kid, it was home. And you're right, it's smack in the middle of nowhere, about 8 hours to the nearest 8-hour drive to the nearest beach being Townsville. But I think what that did teach me, and my dad was a great influence, was the importance of community.
Yeah.
And just how important that is. And we all need a tribe. We all need a community, and we all have the right to belong to a community and feel that we are safe in our community as well. So growing up in Mount Isa certainly taught me just how important community is. Then I left home as soon as I finished high school and went down to Melbourne to study at Monash, and I saw more people on my first day than I had seen in my entire life. So it would have been very easy for me to run home to the safety of that community. But I guess, that's resilience and determination. And I guess what it also taught me, that community and seeing the bigger and the larger world, was just how powerful community can be to actually make change happen. Don't ever think that our individual actions can't make a fundamental difference. And, so often when we are being told there's so many big challenges the world is facing, it's overwhelming. And we can all think, well, my little individual bit can't make a difference at all. But it can, because if you don't give it a go, who is going to give it a go? So everyone has the ability to make a change. But I have met, some incredible people throughout my life, and it's been an amazing journey, going over and living in New York for a few years, having the opportunity to present at the United Nations, the pinch yourself moments. Meeting President Clinton was a pinch yourself moment, and being able to present at some of the forums and do some of the work, I think, is the most humbling as well. Being able to do this work is incredibly humbling, and it hasn't been easy. There's always challenges. I've sold everything that I owned to be able to do this. I'm just very lucky I have a supportive family who said, okay, Mum, and let's give it a go. But we have sold everything because I guess I've realized that how I measure my wealth is not by the amount of money I have in my bank account, because if I do measure my wealth by those traditional terms, then I'm not rich by any means. I'm very poor. But the way I measure my wealth is by my community and by the impact that I can have, and knowing that it's making a difference.
That's, you said earlier, take action. People are looking to companies these days that actually live it, take action. Selling everything you own to actually do this is really taking action. That's a commitment. It's fascinating. I, like you, grew up in small country towns, and in some cases really small, 900 people. But in farming areas, and country towns in Australia only survive if the community works. It is the only way. When a bushfire goes through, everyone's fighting the fire, and it is the only way. And I think, often people say to me, you can take the boy out of the country, but you don't take the country out of the boy. And I think it's because community is so ingrained, it's a part of you. And, you're actually playing that out at a global level, the global community. But I sometimes have a concern that we're not thankful enough for really what community is, and maybe some of the leadership training or lessons that we put people through should focus on community rather than culture. And, so is it all about culture in a company, or is it all about the community of the company?
Well, I would argue that you can't have a culture if you don't have a community. So community is incredibly important. And, you're right, because it does provide that feeling of belonging, which we, as human beings, we all want. We want to know that we belong somewhere. And unfortunately, I think too much community these days sits online.
It sure does. Yeah.
It's not real. And that connection is so important. And, COVID didn't help with that either, when we were all working from home, or when we were isolated and we couldn't engage with people and have that connection. But community is absolutely important.
Yes, I completely agree. Could I ask you, I usually finish off with a few fast questions, 2 or 3 of them, for people to find out a bit more about you. So do you have a personal philosophy or saying that you keep going back to, and it's kind of guided a lot of what you do and who you've become?
Gosh, I think one of my favorite proverbs, if you like, that I have said multiple times is, if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together. And that, that again, that's talking to community, it's talking to collaboration, and it's all about making sure we're working together to solve some of these big challenges.
Yeah, fantastic. If you could have sat in the room of any significant negotiation at any time, anywhere in the world, fly on the wall, you're not a part of the negotiation, you're just able to watch it and really understand what was going on when that negotiation was resolved, what would it have been?
I think I would have loved to have sat in one of Winston Churchill's famous dinner parties, because he was a master of using food to bring people together and to humanize everybody, regardless of who you were in the world. His dinner parties were famous for, being able to get people to talk honestly and openly. And he was the master of, tabletop diplomacy.
I was not aware of that. So
yeah.
I might go and research that after this.
It's really interesting, actually, how he did use dinner parties and food to bring people together and to get leaders to get their guards down and to be able to have that open and honest negotiating conversation.
Wowee. See, unexpected lessons out of the fast questions. And if you could have invented anything at all in the world, or invent something that hasn't been invented yet to solve a problem, what would that be, and why would that interest you?
Gosh, I think if there's anything in the world that I could invent, it would be a way for people to understand how their action is actually so important, and to measure their action and to be able to see how it's making a difference in people's lives. That crystal ball, I guess, would be what I would want to invent, to be able to see a little bit into the future, to make those decisions a little easier.
That's a business all of its own if you manage to do that. That would be a wildly successful business. Kim, I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time. And I want to place a challenge to anybody watching this episode. And the challenge is, I think, 2-part. The first one is, don't forget the message right off the top of the episode about being thankful, for gratitude, using that as a mechanism, a force, if you like, that you can point to anything that you're wanting to solve or improve. It might be a surprising force for good that people aren't thinking about in a world where we're trying to complicate things. Is it as simple as be thankful, be grateful, listen, have conversations? And then the other side of that is, I would challenge people to think deeply about the bigger problems that you're trying to solve. You've heard Kim unpack the deeper conversation around food security and farming and smart farming practices and what that actually means at multiple levels. I think the people that will really change the world are the ones that actually spend that time in deep, wise discernment, who then don't go it alone, but actually go further with collective effort. So Kim, thank you so much for your generosity. Really appreciate it. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I could talk all afternoon with you about this, but I think this is long enough and for an episode. And thank you so much for your generosity.
Oh, thank you, Simon. I appreciated the conversation and always very happy to chat. So thank you for having me as a guest.
Thanks very much.